Washington Journal continues.
And now joining us from Capitol Hill is Representative Nancy Mace, a first-termer from South Carolina, a Republican. Congresswoman, you just went through a second COVID diagnosis, didn't you?
Yes, I sure did at the beginning of the year. I believe it was Omicron based on my symptoms. I did Christmas, I did virtually online. I didn't go out for New Year's, and I still got COVID-19 for a second time. And after being fully vaccinated, it's very frustrating. I was sick for a couple of weeks, actually, and was symptomatic long after I tested negative for COVID-19. I hate this illness.
How severe were your symptoms?
One of the days that I was sick, I had a blood oxygen level that dropped below 90. It got down to 85 this time. The first time I got sick, it was down to 87. And of course, you know, your blood oxygen levels fluctuate as mine did. But for about 36 hours, it was really uncomfortable when that was happening. And we don't know why. I wish we had more information, more science, more studies to understand why certain people react a certain way or have a harder or more difficult time with COVID-19. It's very frustrating. It ripped through my entire family. And I read somewhere too that 66% of Omicron cases were people that had COVID-19 previously. And so I just wish we knew more about this illness and how to treat it prophylactically, treat it better when you have the illness. I wasn't able to get monoclonal antibodies when I was struggling to breathe in my state. I just wish we had more resources to deal with this illness for everybody.
So given your personal experience of the fact that you have two school-aged children, what do you think of mask mandates?
I am not a fan of mandates, period, whether we're talking about masks or vaccinations. Me as a mom and as a parent, I know moms and dads out there want to make healthcare decisions for their kids. I'll tell you, when Delta was surging in South Carolina and when Omicron was surging, I demanded that my kids wear masks at school, and that was my decision, fortunately. And then when there are no spikes, I don't want them to be masked up at school. You know, one of my kids has had COVID twice now. Is built up, I imagine, some immunity to it. Everyone in our family has had it, but I don't want the mask to be a distraction from their learning or their interaction socially with other kids. It's been a real struggle, I will tell you, for our family with COVID-19. At one point at the beginning of the year, our school had to go virtual because Omicron was just ripping through the community. Teachers were getting it, students were getting it. We didn't have enough administration to operate the school. And that set, you know, my kids back a month when we went virtual for 2 weeks. And so it's very frustrating as parents, but I want to make sure that parents have the ability to make healthcare decisions for their kids, period. That's where we should be. And you're seeing different leaders across the country now say masks shouldn't be required. We should get some sense of normalcy back. And that's a great first step, is turning back those sorts of mandates. We should be able to make healthcare decisions for ourselves and for our kids too.
Well, I'm sure you saw this, but I want to play a little bit of Mitch McConnell from yesterday talking about January 6th and get your reaction to it.
Well, let me give you my view of what happened January the 6th. And we're here. We saw what happened. It was a violent insurrection for the purpose of trying to prevent the peaceful transfer of power after a legitimately certified election from one administration to the next. That's what it was.
Nancy Mace, we asked our viewers this morning if they thought, our GOP viewers, if they thought it was an insurrection or a protest. What's your take?
Well, it's really going to be up to the Justice Department and the 4 federal agencies that are investigating January 6th. That's where those charges will come into play. There have been 10 committees, both in the House and the Senate, also investigating January 6th. And then they have the select committee, special committee, also investigating it on top of all of that. And so at the end of the day today, so far, over 700 arrests have been made of individuals during that day. And I was very vocal about how I felt going through that just over a year ago. And, you know, I want to let the process work its way through the court system and be adjudicated really there. You know, I want us also, too, as a country, and not just Democrats, but Republicans too, together, we need to look forward. We need to understand why we have so much political division in this country. We've had violence in our country on the left and the right over the last 2 years. We saw it in my hometown of Charleston in May of 2020. We had violent riots and destruction of businesses one night during that year. But as a nation, we need to look forward and come together and remember why our nation is so great. Remember why freedom and democracy is worth preserving, because we have one of the freest, greatest democracies in the world, and we can live, work, retire, raise our family in an amazing country and prosper. And we've got to work together moving forward. And all this looking back and being vitriolic on social media, attacking people. The American experiment is about debating ideas, debating philosophy, ideology, policy, and being able to walk away at the end of the day and agree to disagree, and agree that violence is not okay, whether it's the left or the right. It's not okay for one side to do it and not the other. And I'll tell you, I've been a victim of threats, both by the far right and the far left. I have 10 cameras at my home, inside and out today, because my house was spray painted last summer. I had my car keyed the year before that when I was in campaign mode and running for South Carolina's 1st Congressional District. I see, and as many other Americans do, and members of Congress alike, we see how this trickles down into our communities, and to our neighborhoods, and to our work, and to even our schools. My kids have been blocked on social media by friends that disagree with them because their mom was a Republican. I mean, and so I've seen it personally trickle down into my life and seen how it's affected all of us. But as a nation, we have got to stop the name calling. We've got to stop some of this rhetoric, and we've got to look forward together and understand that both sides have made mistakes, and that there's been violence, and that we've got to move forward as a nation.
Well, that said, what do you think about your party's censure of Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger?
I didn't read the censure. I've been very much focused on my district, South Carolina's 1st Congressional District. I've got, things I've got to work on this year legislatively. I've just passed a bill out of Oversight Committee last week. I had an amendment passed out of committee and also be attached to a bill last week. It was a historic animal farming bill. We've never banned any type of animal farming that as an amendment or as a bill, and passed it out of the floor of the House. And that was a historic moment last week. And so again, this question was asked of me yesterday, and I'm about unifying my party and bringing people together. And we need to accept that we have members that have different ideas, that have different approaches to different issues. I'm one of those. I march to the beat of my own drum because that's my district. I promised to be an independent voice and that I would work with anyone who was willing to work with me. And I promised, even as a fiscal conservative, that I would reach across the aisle and work with others. And that's where my focus is. That's where I believe all of our focus should be. We were elected to do a job. We weren't elected to trend on Twitter. We were elected to work for the people. And I think that that's where we should all be focusing our efforts, regardless of your political affiliation today.
Yeah, and Earl Blumenauer was here earlier as well. Congressman said that he was working with you on a cannabis legalization bill.
Yes, I unveiled the States Reform Act in November. It's gotten a lot of accolades, been endorsed by conservative groups like Americans for Prosperity. It's been endorsed by veterans groups and law enforcement groups. It also got endorsement by NORML. And it deschedules cannabis off of Schedule 1, which would, of course, allow us to research it. We shouldn't be categorizing or scheduling cannabis as a Schedule 1 drug like opioids or heroin. It's not anywhere near the same thing, and we ought to be able to study it. If it is as good as people say it is for medical purposes, we should be able to research it thoroughly and make recommendations from there. But it also, this States Reform Act recognizes the rights of every state in the country, and all but 3 states have some form of cannabis reform in their state. So my home state of South Carolina, we made CBD and hemp legal. Florida has medical cannabis. Of course, places like California and Colorado, they have full adult use. And this bill recognizes via federalism and states' rights that we're going to recognize the laws of every state to make their decisions on what they want to do, whether it's CBD or full adult use. And so I tried to also bring Republicans and Democrats together. There's something for everyone in here. There's funding for small businesses and community policing. There's funding to ensure that kids are educated on drugs and how bad they are. There's incentives for states not to sell cannabis to anyone under the age of 21. There is a prohibition against marketing and advertising to children. There are protections for veterans with PTSD. We all know that veteran suicide is through the roof. Veterans shouldn't be discriminated when they're trying to seek employment because they're using cannabis. And quite frankly, their doctors at the VA should be able to prescribe it to them if the doctor, qualified medical physician, determines that they need it. And so there's something for everyone in here. There's also expungement and release, safe expungement and release that would say nonviolent cannabis offenders would get released and their records expunged. It doesn't include cartel gang members. It doesn't include DUIs as well. And so I tried to be bipartisan in the approach and recognize that there are certain rights of states, and this is one of them.